co-chair of the ALT Digital Sustainability Special Interest Group, and my colleague Paul is here as well. Would you like to introduce yourself, Paul?
Hi, Kathleen. Yes, thank you. I'm Paul Astles, so I'm the other co-chair of the SIG, and yeah, we've been kind of, I guess, a SIG for just over a year now, and we're very much looking forward to our first live event today. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you. And we're really pleased to have Rita Bateson join us today as well to talk about her work with sustainable AI use and also to help with the session. So I'll start by saying a bit more about the special interest group. We are an open and inclusive network looking to foster collaboration and knowledge sharing among institutions who are committed to taking meaningful, sustainability-focused action. We aim to empower colleagues by providing a space for cross-institutional conversations, for learning and collaboration, and our focus encompasses sustainable digital practices and pedagogy, and the intersection of equality, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility with sustainability. Thank you, Rita. And the next slide discusses our remit, and that is that we aim to enable ALT members to support each other with the interconnected impact of our choices and recommendations in how we work in the context of the three pillars of sustainability. We want to provide a space to share good practice, success stories and resources to support raising awareness about sustainability in learning technologies, learning design and delivery. And we want to promote cross-institutional learning and collaboration in this evolving area by using the knowledge and the expertise of our members to identify strategic solutions to issues and to challenges. And on the next slide, we've got some contact details. You can find out more about our work and how to get in touch with us on the ALT Digital Sustainability site. And we are also on LinkedIn, so you can search for us there. Now I'll hand over to Paul to introduce our Padlet activity.
Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, so during the session, well, I've already shared a Padlet in the chat, and the point of that is to gather suggestions for future events and also to help you reflect on any sort of key takeaways that you might be taking with you. And I want to give a few moments at the start of this session just for you to be able to respond to that first question. So what do you hope to get out of the session? Just again, just by clicking on that Padlet link and popping your answer in that first column. So I can see that there is a little sort of hive of activity on there at the moment. I can reshare the link if that's helpful. It should be the last one in the chat. Yeah, I shall reshare it now. Just there. There we go. And we so whilst Rita is talking, that Padlet will remain open and just, yeah, feel free to kind of add your responses in there as we go. The idea is that we'll be able to kind of reflect on them after the session, and it can help guide our future events as well. So I'm going to move to the next slide now, if that's okay. And the next slide is to introduce the session for today. So we are joined by Rita, a co-founder of, I hope I say this correctly, Eblana Learning, an educational consultancy focused on helping international schools integrate ethical and sustainable AI practices into their teaching and governance. And Rita's going to share how they are advising international schools to balance the benefits of AI with its energy demands, redesign educational workflows for minimal computation, and integrate climate-aligned metrics into educational policy. Now, please do add any questions into the chat as we go through, and we will try to provide some space for Rita to respond to questions at the end of the session. If we run out of time, we will ask, and Rita has already agreed to this. We're not just kind of forcing this on her now, but we will kind of share the questions with her, and we will share what those responses are via our mailing list. So over to you, Rita. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Paul. I'm delighted to be able to speak to you all. I think you'll be able to hear straight away from the accent and then later on from the connectivity challenges. I'm joining you today from Dublin, and there's a reason, both as lived experience but also as a passionate educator, that I really am glad to talk to you today about sustainable AI use. It has been quite a journey for us as educators in universities, in NGOs, thinking about the exciting possibilities and potential of AI, thinking about the terror of what it means for academic integrity. And all the while, we've been walking somewhat energy blind into potentially the new plastic. So I'd like to give you a little bit of background today. I'd like to, as always, apologise if the signal goes. We are in the middle of data centre hell here in Dublin, and if anyone's been to Dublin before, I hope you've experienced the tourism and the delight and, a couple of pints of Guinness. But what we're actually living here, I suppose, is maybe the outer edges or the bleeding edge of technology. And I'll talk to you about that in a moment. In terms of pedigree, I am an experienced educator and have been working in curriculum and assessment for a very long time. For the International Baccalaureate, as a head of school. So I come from a slightly different motivational place, I suppose, than ed tech vendors or most consultancies, where I have the excitement of potentially what this can mean for our underserved students, communities, and parts of the curriculum. And I'm incredibly worried about reckless experimentation and adoption. So, coming from that non extreme view, I think I'll frame it first of all that I am very fond of this UNESCO definition. And I know it doesn't directly relate to all of your perspectives, perhaps, but this is what we're seeing in international education, a feeling that teachers could never live up to this definition that the UNESCO provides, which is in this world where AI is saturating our classrooms, the feeling that teachers are the ones who must be the guardians of safe and ethical practices. And so far, so good, we could just ignore it and avoid it and block it until we get to the statement where they say, across AI rich educational environments. So, not a denial, not a skepticism to the point of avoidance, but this balance between we want safe and ethical practices. And the word that's missing there, of course, is sustainable across AI rich educational environments, ensuring that students' privacy and human agency are protected. I think those are always our goals in sustainability conversations as well. What is our agency in this moment? What are our responsibilities? And what are outside the scope or the world of our control? So I'm going to give you some insight into the nature of the multi-layered complex situation we find ourselves in. And then, of course, there's no position that we can take. We cannot sit in despair. We need to think about, okay, this is an acknowledged problem. How do we rectify it? How do we empower students and teachers to be able to deal with it effectively? So let me give you some background first of all. Eblana Learning is an educational consultancy that works with international schools, mainly because that's where our background is. We're very experienced working with international schools, but the same message applies to every school. We need core ethical principles in our schools so that we can make use of this technology effectively, wisely, and well. And those core ethical principles that we work with our schools to make sure is that they are really, really clear about what's working and what isn't. Too many of our international schools feel that it's either good AI or bad AI, when we, as assessment and learning professionals, know that it's good use case of AI and bad use case of AI. So we ask that they all commit and understand these 5 core ethical principles. And those are that AI, any decision that is made with it, has to be clear and explainable. And I think that's something that speaks to the black box nature of AI in our schools at the moment. You guys are in a slightly different position in the UK where you don't fall under the EU AI Act, but the requirements for schools now under that Act are extremely high, where they need to understand every single use case in the school, whether it's on students' phones or whether it's in teachers' home laptops. Every single use of AI has to be thoroughly vetted and controlled and risk mitigated. So we have to make sure that we also ensure that AI is being fairly used, not discriminating, as per its sometimes biased data sets might open us up to. Humans have to be very accountable for the AI decisions that are made in that school, and privacy and safety have got to be number one. But what does this have to do with sustainability, you ask? So let me tell you about a couple of those patterns and trends and what we're seeing in those international schools, which I think reflects many schools that we speak of. AI has introduced a huge level of friction between different stakeholders. We are called into a great number of schools where in the first year, concern was about student use, chasing students, catching students, policing AI use in education. In the last year, I've noticed that pattern of friction has changed completely, where students are now annoyed at teacher overuse or teacher underuse. They often say to me, if I wanted ChatGPT feedback, I could have got that for myself. I wanted you to read the thing, is what they say to teachers. And it's interesting that they don't notice necessarily the irony that even if the AI produced the work, they still want a human evaluation. Next, we notice this irony of personalised feedback, where schools were issuing reports and grades and AI influenced information, and it was received very, very poorly. We see in all of our schools at the moment a concern about student and sometimes teacher use of AI for non academic purposes, so for educational support. And as always, these conversations in schools come back to academic integrity and increasingly evidence of cognitive offloading, where we see students reaching for AI before they reach for advice from a peer or a trusted adult. Schools that we visit observe that their Microsoft Teams chats have gone dead. Their Google Classroom conversations are empty because nobody's asking each other to verify information. What was I supposed to do? They're turning to AI chatbots first, or LLMs. And this is probably why I feel so passionately about it. What is happening here at my home in Dublin? So, if you're familiar with Dublin, and I hope you are, you'll know that we have had economic prosperity probably for only about 30 years or so. Until then, our chief exports were Guinness, beef, and bad poetry. So, we are very beholden to foreign direct investment. And that foreign direct investment appears in pharma and big tech. And whatever pharma and big tech want, we're kind of in a position in Ireland where we have to give it to them. So there are a huge number of data centers in my location, in my direct vicinity, which is why I apologise in advance if anything disappears. We've been struggling for the last few weeks since ChatGPT brought in 5.1 and Claude introduced Opus and a new model for Gemini, and the popularity of Nano Banana has made my working life very difficult. And let me tell you why. As you know, I hope, AI is a massive consumer of energy. It's a huge drain on any infrastructure. And in Ireland, because of our position economically and geographically, we're the perfect hub for data center activity. So, over a fifth of our energy consumption of the whole country in 2023, the beginning of ChatGPT, we saw a huge spike where a fifth of the energy is dedicated to the data centers. But in Dublin, it's much, much worse. Where I am, it's now increased over 55%, which means that half of the energy is dedicated to the data centers. And as we know, as soon as data center provision drops, everybody panics. So we're in a situation now where they're actively diverting energy from homes and hospitals to make sure the data centers don't go down. So for the first time in my life since the 80s, we're having power cuts again. We're having huge brownouts, which is periods when we expect the energy to go out, which is not, I know it sounds very first world problems or whatever they call it, but it's an unusual change and it's something to observe. It's gotten so bad, to be honest, that they've put a moratorium on building any more data centres in Dublin. And which is why you see now tech companies looking elsewhere. We see suddenly data centres springing up in impoverished sections of the US. They're building data centres in Mexico, in the UAE. So the data centre bubble or population increase, whatever you want to think about, is since the moratorium on building in Dublin, which means that we need to think about our climate change goals. We have committed to greenhouse gas targets, and we've openly now admitted in the media and the politicians, it's just become an accepted topic that we are not going to meet those goals. Because the data center dedication is so important to us. I mean, it's not just AI, of course, it's also farming, it's also industry, but the increase is solely attributed to AI. A few years ago, the Irish government had a massive push on for solar cells. And I think we added something like, 200 terawatts energy to the grid from the increase in solar cells. And that got immediately eaten up by AI. So to go from about 5% of our energy consumption to over 55% in 3 years has to be attributable to the increased demand in AI. And one of the solutions that big tech proposed was to build a brand new infrastructure that could sit independently from the Irish network. And I'm not sure if you can associate or recognize yourselves in this, but we have a crumbling Victorian infrastructure here that has never been fully maintained or updated. And to give these companies a parallel world in which to operate, was quite attractive to our government. Initially, I don't think they've said a full no yet, but I don't think that this is a viable alternative for us. So that we have to acknowledge right now we are experiencing a massive strain on our infrastructure here. And it's not very politically discussed. It's kind of an accepted truth that if AI needs power, AI is going to get that power, whether that is in the form of fossil fuels, whether that is in the form of micronuclear plants. It has really changed the conversation on energy in the last 3 years. And I think it's important that we recognize that. When we're working in schools, I think the number one experience is that AI is friction free and it's cost free. You ask a question, you receive an almost instantaneous answer. And of course, that's not the case. So, the first thing we do with students and with adults sometimes is have them understand where the energy is being consumed exactly. And we have to acknowledge that these are imperfect calculations, partially because it's proprietary information and it's hard to validate. And secondly, because it's dropping and changing and increasing and dropping and changing all the time. So we have to come from this from a position of fuzzy logic and do the best, most accurate calculations we can, acknowledging that they are imperfect. But we know energy is used in server processing. We know that cooling systems are essential to make sure that chips don't overheat. We know that there are infrastructure and maintenance requirements for energy. And we know that the energy efficiency of every model can change and can change with an update or a retune. So it's constantly changing. You might have seen this zombie statistic that half a litre of water is used to cool a single prompt. Now, that has been fairly well discredited and misinterpreted. But the sense of it, I think the inner truth of it is that we do worry about access to clean water. You can't use salt water to cool a data center for obvious reasons. So access to fresh water is really important. Not a problem we have here in Dublin with our copious amounts of rain, but I can imagine that when they're building a 1.3 trillion data center in the UAE, or when they're opening these colossal data centers in Texas, for example, or Florida, or New Orleans, where we see them popping up all the time, that access to fresh water and clean water will be prioritized by the data centers. So the numbers may not be as huge as we initially thought with water consumption, but they are still important and they are still valid. It's very important for schools to have equivalences or realistic numbers that they can hold on to, because this can feel very abstract and very hard to interpret. So we always draw people's attention to how much energy it requires at first to train a model, because that's important. So if we take a fairly old model now, I can't believe I'm calling ChatGPT 4 old, but it is. And we think about the financial cost and we think about the energy cost that it took simply to train it, not to fine tune it, not to roll it out with consumption or regular use. Something like 50 gigawatt hours of energy was required to train a model that's at least 9 models ago. And when we have students and we like to say to them, okay, this is the cost of it, this is what it requires to get it up and running, and this is one of many, many, many models. Let's extrapolate those numbers. Let's consider what that means for us. And MIT did quite a good study on this there a few months ago, and it's worth a read, where they consider where we might be by 2028. And I know at the start of the year when I was reading statistics and studies, the feeling was that we might, by the end of the year, reach the same amount of energy consumption by AI as the national requirement for the whole of the Netherlands. And then I think we hit that in about March. So then I saw that, well, we were on track to make sure that we would to reach the same amount of energy consumption as Japan. And I think we've surpassed that already. So it is really, really important that we think ahead. What will the cost, both financial, intellectual, but most importantly, environmental, of constant model development be? At what point will we have the models that we're happy enough with at the efficiency levels that we consider appropriate? And what will that mean for us? And something very tangible is important for students to be able to hang on to. So we consider that if by 2020 the uppermost estimates are correct, then the amount of energy used by AI purposes alone would be the same as a fifth of US household consumption. And that's huge. That's the same amount of CO2 emissions as driving 300 billion miles or 1,600 round trips from the sun to the earth. These are phenomenal numbers. They may not be what plays out, they may not be the exact future, but they are worth a serious consideration. What we ask students and teachers and educational institutions, and we work with the International Baccalaureate, we're trying as closely as we can to influence the decisions made around assessment and curriculum with UNESCO and Gates Foundation. And these are a couple of truths we have to accept. That text generation is low energy, but frequent use. I think the last most trustworthy statistic I saw was that ChatGPT is receiving 2.5 billion messages per day. So that's 30,000 messages per second. Now, those are text, they are lower demand, but they are increasing every single day. Gemini has I'm just checking my numbers over here, 35 million daily active users as of this week. These are huge numbers. And then we add images. And images are a high demand. One image generation is the same amount of energy, as far as we can tell, for 3 charges of your mobile phone. And people are generating images all the time. Every time you log into an AI model or you open an AI model, it seems to be offering you an image straight away. Sometimes it's embedded in the answer, even if you didn't ask for it. So this is a model that is trying to build stickiness. They want us to use image generators. Our job is to think about the energy demand for that. So when we're in a school, we talk very carefully with them about the difference between images for educational value and images for entertainment, because we don't need more memes if 100 memes are the same amount of energy as powering a home for 3 weeks. So it's really important that we think about that. And then we think ahead to the world where video generation and 3D world model generation will be much more accessible and potentially affordable. Those are huge energy demands. In fact, I find it very hard to bring myself to make an AI video for absolutely anything unless it's for educational or experimentational purposes. And even then, I feel quite guilty. So we're about to enter the Catholic guilt section of the talk today. So I think it's really important that we think about the cumulative effect. So if a student thinks about image generation, we always ask that we think, is that image already available? And now, in industrial terms, perhaps that image is licensed or it's copyrighted or we can't use it for some reason. But for students, generating a new image every time and then iterating 4 or 5 images might not be the most sustainable choice. Perhaps an image or a good enough image already exists out there. And if they want to generate a video, then I make them understand that the amount of energy required for a 30-second video of high quality in VO3, for example, they're incredibly powerful now and they're incredibly accurate, but very few students get it first time. Their prompting skills, their model familiarity skills require multiple iterations. So if they're making many videos, I don't even want to think about it, but if they are, I try and help them understand that one single video of 30 seconds is the same as watching all of the episodes, every single episode of the entire series of Friends, 5,000 times. And I think students really understand the power of streaming. They get it, they feel it. So it's something that I really ask them to consider very carefully when it comes to video generation. And there are a few statistics here. Most of these I'm fairly confident about. I've done my homework and I've recalculated it. I'm a physicist by background, so I don't trust numbers until I've seen and done and got my hands dirty with the numbers. But these are a few things that I have noticed and observed and I think are worth consideration. That the global consumption is an issue. The scaling effect. Every time the technology gets better, we do see a slight increase in the efficiency, but then we see a massive increase in demand. Jevons paradox kind of to the nth degree. It's very worrying. And the demand for chips and the power of chips is growing and growing all the time. And because it's in the background, because it's not paid for by us in our day-to-day consumption, I think it's very easy to ignore these true and stark realities. So we ask ourselves as educators, what are the risks that we're introducing? And when we work with schools, we process all these risks, we manage these risks, we mitigate them, and then we hope for the best. But then we don't necessarily put sustainable AI at the very front of our consideration, because schools have a fear of missing out and they have a fear of messing up. And when they have a fear of missing out, they go very deep and very hard for AI literacy. And when they have a fear of messing up, they lean on AI ethics. And the only productive, efficient place to be and the most positive and forward thinking is somewhere in the middle, where we balance AI literacy with AI ethical considerations. So we do want schools and education and learning technologies to consider the phenomenal rise and the promise and the peril. But we don't want a culture of energy blindness. We want to experiment. We need some guardrails. And we probably need some ground rules to consider as well. because AI can be a significant consumer of resources. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the trends and kind of the patterns of discussion and discourse that I've seen over the last probably 8 or 9 months, since it's become obvious, I think, to the industry, and that it's become obvious to governments, that AI plus power is an issue. And AI plus energy is a real consideration as we see country after country race or kind of enter this arms race for AI dominance. So it's important that we think about what the responses are. And in the first half of the year, I noticed, you probably have too, I noticed some kind of similarities in the conversation as we did with climate change, global warming, denialism. There was a feeling that, well, you think we're bad, look at meat. Or you think we're bad, we're nothing compared to China's production of X or whatever it was. And I saw that discourse happen a lot up until around June. At June, in around June, the tone somehow changed. So it went from, well, we're not bad, look over there, to a discussion or a kind of a euphemistic approach to never actually talking about energy or power. When they would say these, I think it has become now an accepted truth that the energy demand for AI is real. It's non-deniable. It is absolutely a factor. But the language changed around then, where you didn't hear so much about energy or power, you would hear terms like compute. It needs more compute. And it sounds quite neutral. Or you might hear inference of scale, that new models, new chips required greater inference at scale possibilities, and therefore the resources had to be made available for that. Or training runs. You would hear things like training runs or workloads, lots of euphemistic terms. And when I hear these, when I hear latency optimization, or I hear we need more compute, in my head, it's screaming, we need more power. We need more energy for this. You will hear these terms, you will see these terms, and sometimes you can just swap them straight out for energy and think, okay, what truth are we avoiding here? What conversation are we not having? Because I don't honestly think I ever thought I would see a world in which we had normalized nuclear energy conversations again so quickly. The idea that 3 Mile Island being bought by Microsoft and kind of reinstated, and that's simply not even passing any conversation at all about it. The idea that we would have rollbacks on our fossil fuel targets because we needed to feed this new beast of AI energy. And I think that is what's surprising about it. The speed at which the Overton window of conversation, the acceptable and unacceptable world of sustainability has moved. And I think it has affected our considerations. And the last thing we want is to repeat the mistakes of the past with plastic, because plastic is an incredible life-saving tool and it's a horrific pollutant. And we can see the exact same parallel with AI. So I'm going to use a case study, for example, about the excitement about learning technologies. I want to give you an example from the world in which I am very familiar, the International Baccalaureate. Now, the International Baccalaureate is, they have a culminating exam at 18. And if many of you are in universities, you're probably familiar with students who've come from that system. It was originally a system designed for a very mobile international population. And so you would often have a very elite, privileged world for many of our schools in the IB system, but not entirely. It has diversified and it has expanded. But one of the main considerations, I think, for every assessment body is the excitement about what AI could do. Because let's be honest, humans are quite expensive. Human authors, bringing them together in a meeting, paying for licensed images, these are all very expensive things. And when you have to write an exam that works for every country in every context, you need multiple time zones. But then we notice with the internet that even with multiple time zones, we get a huge amount of exposure still. So now we need 24 time zones or personalised exams for every school. Or why stop there? Personalised exams for every student. So if AI could unlock those potentials, they're worth exploring. And we do have to do the background homework. We have to think, what will this mean? If we move to AI influenced assessment, if we move to AI influenced teaching, what is the unforeseen consequence? What is the uncalculated cost? So we'll take an example. I don't know if any of you have ever been into an exam writing session, but if you have, they are the most contentious, most awkward, most challenging environments I've been in outside of an Irish wedding at 4 a.m. because they will question every single word. It has to be robust, it has to be tested, it has to be so accessible and yet challenging and flexible and rigorous. So I could see how AI could really help in this scenario. So let's take a scenario. You have an examiner who wants to write a single question with AI. They have a good idea. They want to use AI as a thought partner, and they've encouraged to do so. So imagine they ask about 15 questions, 15 prompts, checking a fact, checking an idea, developing something, maybe checking it for cultural sensitivity or vocabulary complexity, whatever it might be. So they've done 15 questions. They also want an image, a stimulus image, or an illustration, or a graph, or an equipment apparatus view, whatever it might be. So following that, they do 10 attempts at an image. And as you know, with AI, it rarely just gives you one image. Quite often it'll give you a choice of 4 in Gemini, or 2 in ChatGPT, or in Kimi K2. So you might have multiple attempts there. And then you have to justify everything about your question to your fellow examiner authors. So you would do a quick 5-second video. So based on the MIT calculations, that would take about 3 kilowatt hours of energy. And that's very abstract. So let's think about what that actually feels like. That is approximately equivalent to 10 miles of an EV car by driving, or, and this is the one that hurts, 3.5 hours of microwaving. As anyone who has to pay the bill, I think it's important. Students don't feel 3.5 hours of microwaving, but there's something very visceral about it. The idea that you can replace it with a kettle, you can replace it with any kind of energy intense apparatus. But to write one question, which may or may not be used, one of 20 questions in the paper, and one of 20 questions in 6 subjects and 58 papers across that year, we have to think of the scale factor here. We have to think of the wider situation. So we think about when we move to on-screen exams, which is a big push in assessment and learning technologies, of course, is we need to think about at what point does paper versus on-screen actually balance out? Which one is more, I think we need a more nuanced conversation about the sustainability of on-screen assessment, of AI use in assessment, of AI use in the classroom. So I'll come back to my IB diploma. This year, 192,000 students sat the IB diploma. And approximately they do 6 subjects each. And each subject has minimum 2 papers, sometimes 3. And I took an estimate of the average questions per exam. So if we decided to automate or use AI simply to open each response, instead of scanning the responses and sending them to examiners and then having the examiners open them, it generates a single agent 23 million actions, 23 million unique queries, without using AI to mark it, without using AI to notify a human to look at it. Let's say there are sub questions as well. So now we're into 56 million or 112 million, depending on the subparts for each question. And so I think it's important if you're an educational institution to think, if we move to on-screen, if we move to AI, everybody will follow us in that direction because you're modeling for schools, you're modeling for students what's acceptable. So I did some imperfect calculations with ChatGPT and then, of course, verified them afterwards. So imagine I designed an AI agent just to do that 23 million queries, nothing else, no other requirement, no workflow, just I want you to open it and close it and tell me how much energy that would use and give me some equivalences so I can feel this energy demand. And ChatGPT gave me the following 5, of which I think 3 are correct. So it gave an approximate driving distance to create an agent for that one move. That's 17,028 miles, the same CO2 generated. Because, of course, we think of the energy for an AI, we think of the cooling water, but we also have to think of the CO2 emissions that sit in tandem with those 2 demands. The trees absorbed, the short haul round trip flights. And I think here's a really interesting thing that it chose flights, because we know that the CO2 emissions from the airline industry was surpassed by AI already in 2023. So I can't imagine what it looks like now at the end of 2025. It gives us transatlantic flights. It gives us car emissions. Now, as I said, 2 of those are correct. So I asked again, what are the break-even points? At which point, energy-wise, is it better for me to switch to on-screen or paper? And at which point, CO2-wise, is it better for me to switch to on-screen or manual? And it was interesting that the CO2 emissions breakpoint was much, much further So it would only take nearly 2 billion queries for me to say, okay, now I want an AI agent. This is more efficient. Or now I want to stick with the current systems we have already, not to change. And I think both of those things can be valid. The IB could say to me, okay, 2 billion queries, that's worth us doing. That is way better than having FedEx vans go around the world, than having teachers printing out papers. This is much, much better for us. And I would say, okay, that's great. Then we have made a reasoned and logical approach to this learning technology, that we have made a decision based on, if not perfect calculations, at least we've calculated, at least we've tried to make the right determination. And I extend this to every application of AI that we have in schools. And I work through this with schools all the time, with leaders and with networks, to think, okay, if we want to adopt AI here, have we done the necessary groundwork? Have we considered the energy demand? Am I including comic strips because that's the only way I'm going to be able to reach this autistic child? Or am I doing comic strips because it's a gimmick and I want to do it for the class and it'll buy me 5 minutes of excited engagement? So these are the crucial questions that I ask every school to consider. Is your classroom environment actually richer? And if so, yes, valid use case. Enjoy. It's worth it. It's the plastic that helps us stay safe and stay well and be hygienic. If it's not, it is another throwaway piece of plastic. Has it genuinely freed up time for you? Because this is an interesting one. There's so many educational technologies that promise teachers time back. And either I hear reports from teachers saying, well, I spent longer correcting it and reworking it than if I'd done it myself. And that tends to be teachers of a certain vintage. You don't hear that from everybody, but you do hear it. And it's interesting to see, did it genuinely free up time? And if it did, another follow-up conversation that's really interesting is, what did you do at that time? Because we have had some schools where teachers and AI champions really did save themselves time. They offloaded their voice maybe into an 11 Labs, or they had an avatar, sent videos, or they automated their email responses and newsletters. And then they would excitedly share that with everybody. I've saved 10 hours or I've saved 20% of my working week. And the school then turns around and gives them another class because they've advertised they're free. So is the reward for an increase in productivity more work? Or could we use it to spend more time with our students? Could we protect it to get a bit more of a work-life balance again? Could we keep more teachers in the profession by using AI wisely and then protecting the saved time? As somebody who's taught in the UK for a long time, and I now know that many teachers who I worked with at the time are no longer in the profession, I see that there could be a potential unlock here for retaining teachers in the system that they love, but cannot keep up with the workload. And I think this could be really potentially very beneficial. So if it genuinely frees up time for you and you're using that time well, or you're protecting that time, then it's a perfectly valid use of AI. And it is worth the energy cost that it creates. And I think this is the key one. If it's serving students in a way that you cannot currently, I think this is where the potential really is. So many of our students, whether they have educational needs, whether they have emotional needs, whether they are one of the 2 million UK students who have fallen out of full-time education under 18, whether it's our introverts who never get fully served in our day-to-day typical practice in schools. If AI could reach any of them and lower the barrier for access to information and education for them, then it's a perfectly valid use case. In fact, if you talk to people from the Special Olympics, or if you talk to any special needs coordinator, they are the most excited about the potential for this technology. So if you can give me a yes to one or more of these questions, I say absolutely, go for it. But if you can give me a yes to this question, it makes me wonder about everything else that went before. Has it reduced productive struggle in students? And this is a worrying phenomenon that we notice with the cognitive offloading. We see that students are reaching for AI as an alternative to having to think and having to do the hard work themselves. They are figuring out ways to retrofit essays. So I've seen this recently. It's really ingenious when you think about it. A student can have the essay written first based on their own thoughts, and then have AI coach them through a defense of that essay so that they know the essay well enough to be able to counteract any accusations of academic misintegrity, which I guess is kind of like learning anyway. I suppose you have to give them some credit and some kudos for learning it afterwards. But it is important that we maintain a productive struggle in students. We don't want struggle, we want productive struggle. We don't want friction-free existences for them, because friction, as we know, creates light and heat, or converts light and heat. There's the physicist in me, but it essentially forces moments of struggle so that they can learn and embed it. I hear so many schools who are worrying about students' attention since social media, but now I'm hearing about schools that worry about retention since AI, because a lot of the information that they're consuming is surface level. So how do we do that? And how do we keep assessment valid? But let's think about this. If we know now that every time we use AI, Rita wants us to feel guilty, that's not a productive world in which to live. That is not a place in which we can say, okay, we have made conscious decisions around our AI implementation, and we can go forward knowing that we're doing the best we can by students and or the planet, or hopefully both. So what can we actually do? Well, we do have with schools, we try and give them a framework in which to think about, should we be using it? I've gone to teachers first. I should probably go to students. I stole this from TikTok. I say stole, but she gave me permission to use it. From this adorable little sub-trend of underconsumption core, which is something I saw kind of bubble up a little while ago, where people were super excited to share examples where they used something up until it was empty, or they've repaired things so they didn't have to buy something new. And I thought, wow, that's just normal life. But apparently it's not. It's a trend. And it means that it was a really nice framing. It was somebody sharing their underconsumption hack, which was, why am I buying this thing? Am I buying it for an emotional reason? Will I still wear it in 5 years? Do I have one already? Pretty much. And it was a questionnaire, which was kind of a one pager, deliberation station to think, do I really need to buy this thing right now? And I thought, what a useful framing for AI adoption. Do I really need this? Is it aligned with my learning goals? Do I already know the answer? Is it in my school bag, for example? Is it something I could turn to somebody and ask? Am I just feeling a bit lazy today? Am I prepared to explain my use authentically and honestly? Will I still be proud of my own work? Is there an energy cost to what I'm doing? And if you say enough yeses, then that's perfectly okay. You have thought about it beforehand. We've deliberated one moment before we reached for AI. And that's as much as I think we can ask from students at the moment when they're being bombarded with AI technologies, as we are as adults too. So I designed one in the end then as well for teachers, because teachers are feeling the same kind of pressure to go, 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 rush, 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 adopt or avoid, as the case may be. So we need a more deliberate approach. We need a more critical thinking lens or a critical evaluation piece around AI adoption. And this tends to be where we have our biggest aha moments with schools, where they realize, okay, there are valid cases, there are invalid cases, and there are grey or edge use cases where we're going to make a decision, we're going to discuss it, and we're going to make the best possible choice for right now. And if the facts change, or the efficiencies change, or the numbers change, then our opinion can change later. And I think that's an important place to be in. You'll also see in the last kind of 3 or 4 weeks another change in the discourse, which is where the narrative is being taken back by AI and say in companies, for example, saying, yes, the energy is a lot. That's true. You have a good point. However, the things that it can unlock for us are incredible. And the examples that I'll always hear them use are breast cancer detection or vaccine development or cells and battery development. And I think those are 3 very, very good examples where they say, yes, stay with us. For the energy demand right now is huge, but it will pay off. It will solve these problems in the long run. And I think there's a certain amount of validity to that argument. I just hadn't heard it before about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and now I seem to hear it absolutely everywhere. So I'm watching that as interesting, but it does speak to a deeper hope that all of this will have been worthwhile, that all of the energy we will spend to get to general intelligence or artificial super intelligence will fix all the problems that we have now. And I think that is interesting. And in the meantime, if there are opportunities for us to make greener choices, if there are lighter models, if there's a less Timu or Sheen approach to grab, 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 buy, 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 then I think those were good decisions worth making in the moment. And I think I do this myself too. If I have a choice of models, which I do as a human and as somebody who lives in a Western democracy, I have a choice of models available to me. Which one is the best choice for my use case? Because I often don't need the best one. I'm not a coder. I'm not somebody who's working in enterprise, embedding a huge amount of technology. I have a choice. much as I do, I kind of apply my red wine philosophy at a restaurant. I don't go for the cheapest and I don't go for the most expensive. I go for the one that will, just get me at the exact right price point. If we could have more of that approach, we can use tools like the AI energy score for publicly or open source models. It can tell you the factor difference between the highest and the lowest, and then you can choose something that fits your use case. Now, of course, they're working on, again, imperfect calculations. But the fact that there is a 62,000 times difference between the highest and the lowest of any of these models is something that should give us pause. Do we need something with 1 trillion parameters? Or can we get away with a lighter, easier, less consuming model? And that's a choice that we can give schools and teachers and technologists. We can keep an eye on these things in the infrastructure. As we said, I'm delighted the call has lasted this long. In fact, I hope I'm still on, because quite often it's dropping due to the demand. So you'll see that it's changing across the energy network. It's changing our considerations. In the past, when I worked at the IB, we had to have backup plans for on-screen exams in countries where the infrastructure was unreliable, in parts of Africa, in parts of Asia. Now we have to make the same calculations for Ireland and in the future for other countries. There are moments when we can't fully rely on supply. And then there's some more ideas here, some infographics. I think things like this are really useful for schools, for educators, and for us as humans to think about our consumption. And I think that's all we can do. We can have conscious consumption. There is no world in which I'm not going to use plastic. But there's a world in which I can choose the moment before I buy a single-use plastic, or the moment before I throw away a piece of plastic and could potentially recycle it. So it's all about more ethical considerations, more conscious consumption. I think that's really important. And I do advocate that we consider, maybe sometimes it's the only diet I'm on at the moment, right before Christmas, this idea of an energy diet. We want more conscious consumptions. Do we have opportunities to reduce our consumption? That might help our cognition. Do we have opportunities where we teach students, hallucinations exist. It's wandered off in this conversation. Stop trying to argue with it. Don't try and bring it back. It's a waste of energy and time. Start a new thread. There are small behavioral nudges that we can do with students. We can say, the better you are at prompting, i.e. writing, the faster you'll get to your desired output. So let's really focus on your literacy here. You can also work with schools and say, okay, do you have a position on? And then they can define something. So, for example, world models. Education gets really excited about the possibility of an immersive world in which you could travel in time or zoom in to a magnified physical, some kind of let me think, what am I trying to say? So some kind of physical process, like you could actually go into the digestive process or you could see respiration happening. Imagine living in that world. We see such educational potential there. And the while I'm thinking, oh my God, the energy required to generate a virtual holodeck is obscene. So how do we get there in the most ethical and sustainable way? So we ask ourselves, what of the AI adoptions could be scaled back? What could be done more thoughtfully, more consciously? And I'm practicing this now. And in our company, unfortunately, I force everybody to do this, which is unmanageable and insane for anybody else. But I keep a track of my log. It was easier before AI overviews came in and blew up my calculations. But I tend to keep a disclosure. When I'm using AI for something, I will not use it for slides, for example. We don't use it for any video generation in our materials or resources or work with NGOs intentionally. So we hire a human designer. And guess what the human designer did first time? She reached for AI. So it's important that we have ethical determinations and we say, no, this is how we position ourselves as thought leaders. This is where we feel is really important in our considerations. And here's where we can live with it. And here's where we see the power and potential. And I think that is crucial, that we equip students and ourselves with the tools to make really good decisions and accept with humility that we won't be able to make the right decisions all the time because we simply don't have all the variables. We don't know the parameters. We're doing the best that we can. So I'd like to finish on this idea that I'll go back for 1 second. Now, so this is the insane part. I have started to calculate my AI use and offset it. It's very hard to buy CO2 credits as an individual. It's virtually impossible to buy it outside of the industrial complex. So I've started to actually just plant things. I couldn't think of a better way to offset my carbon and the use of AI and to feel better about it. And I do not hold anybody else to that standard. It would be unrealistic and impossible. And it's only made possible but for me because I married a Yorkshireman who wanted to have an allotment. So he's very graciously indulged me in those things. But I think for me, it gives a physical, tangible cost to what I'm doing. And it makes me think twice before I reach for AI. And I think that's a good practice and that's a good place to be in. If you're on a diet, you don't reach for every snack. And AI has the real potential to be an Ozempic for learning. It can cut off our hunger. It can cut off our curiosity for learning. So how do we stay hungry? How do we stay conscious of what we're using and consuming? And how do we then live with ourselves when we decide that this is a good use case? So I would ask you to think about those things, about acting with purpose in learning technologies, about how we integrate ethical and sustainable practices. Whose job is it to do at least a first pass calculation on the decision we're about to make? Who can do those calculations? Where do we source the data? And if the data is imperfect, how can we still make a good choice going forward? That's a plug for a book. Ignore that. That's fine. Here is where I'd like to just mention that I would love to stay in contact with anybody who has an opportunity or a platform to share this message, because I think what Dublin is experiencing now is just the beginning. I think what other people will begin to experience or feel in a way that has been abstract and theoretical till now. So I'd like to thank you so much for the opportunity of nagging, lecturing, whatever you want to say about the kind of the lived experiences we have here in Dublin now and how it relates to every aspect of AI in education. Please do stay connected on LinkedIn. If you'd like a copy of the slides, I'd be very happy to share it. We do have an online free course for the sustainable use in AI in schools that might be of interest. I know you're not necessarily in schools or educational contexts only, but we do try and share this message as much as possible. So I'm going to stop sharing now in a moment. Please do feel free to reach out if there's anything I can do in your organization, if there's anything I can do to support this message. It is not an anti-AI message, which is why we're so committed to having tools and supports and equivalences and education around it. We do want the power and potential of AI. We just don't want it at any cost. So how can we help in those considerations? So thank you so much for your time. I tried to rush the last little bit so we'd have some time for questions and answers, or at least further discussion. I hope that's okay with everybody.
Thank you so much, Rita. I've written in my notes, thought-provoking, and it definitely was. And comments in the chat also say thought-provoking. So thank you again for that. We do have a few minutes. Does anybody have any questions or comments that they would like to ask Rita?
I'm Irish. I can obviously talk for the next 8 minutes. No bother. But it's a very emotive topic, I think, as well, because people who are very excited about AI are super excited about AI, and they should be. But, and I don't like to be the fun police here, there is a cost.
Dominic, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure I've fully formed a reasonable question in my head off the back of that, Rita, because that was there was a lot to take in, and I think I consider myself as somebody fairly knowledgeable about this sort of stuff. I don't quite have the same lived experience that you've described. So I suppose the closest I've got to formulating a question, excuse me, jumping in ahead of everybody there, is how is your message generally received? You've got a lot of complexities around that. The sort of plastic metaphor is one that resonated immediately with me. You know, I can imagine that there are, you know, one needs to have that view on plastic for it to resonate as a metaphor, and not everybody will see it in that way. So yeah, I just kind of wondering how how your message goes down with those that you pass it on to, other than the sort of willing-minded like us.
It's a great question, because of course the sustainability piece that we do is such a small part of what we work with schools. With schools, we're often doing AI strategy, ethics, academic best practices. So this is only a very small part, but I think because I'm so passionate about it, I make it a prerequisite. It does land very well with those who are already of a similar mind frame to us, a mindset. I think that's fair to say. With, say, for example, US audiences who may or may not have a drill baby drill approach to the world, even still, I think they find it really interesting that this is very little talked about. It's very rarely considered. And there's a couple of the things. The image being 3 charges of a mobile phone, or a video equating to watching an episode of something you're familiar with 5,000 times. When I first did that calculation, it was 5 million times, and it was a real whoa. But it has like reduced in demand by about 10,000x. And I'm committed to updating those statistics so that one day we'll have good statistics to look at. People who hear that do go, oh, I'm going to be a bit more careful in future. And that's all I wanted, that just that moment of, I will be a little bit more deliberate before we adopt this recklessly and wildly. I never thought that I'd live in a world where airlines had to publish their CO2, emissions, and be accountable for that. So I don't see a reason in which that wouldn't be the direction of travel here, unless something like China, that's committed to K-12 education, fully embracing it, absolutely. Even in those documentations, I see evidence of concern around ethics and sustainability. Or if I look at the US executive order now, where they're empowering the Department of Energy and the Department of Agriculture to release any lands you can. And I think the fact that I'm hearing more and more discussion about what a 1 trillion watt plant is equivalent to, or, I'm hearing more of these energy discussions than I ever did before. The people who don't want to hear it have never wanted to hear it. I can't reach them, to be honest. But I think we get a lot of schools who approach us and say, can you come and do tools? Come and teach my teachers efficiency. And we make the ethics piece a non-negotiable. We do the first hour on that so that every conversation after then, in terms of efficiency and the best tools, has been laden already. The earth has been salted already. But you're right. I mean, the session I just did that tried to condense in 40 minutes, that takes 2 hours to go through properly, to give people reflection time and to give people argument time and deliberation and debate, because that's also their right. And the people who don't want to touch AI with a barge pole, pulling them back from, aha, I told you so. I told you so. I'm an absolute killer. Bringing those people along, because there is no potential in schools for for objectors. You can have conscientious objectors. We can't force you to do AI, but the conscientious part is being informed about it and what the students are doing and the mitigation factors. So I don't think that fully answers your question, but because it's a small part of the puzzle and that one piece is the piece I place first, it does land better with educators. And mostly, I mean, to be honest, I'm in international schools or in NGOs where people's hearts and minds are already in the right place. I'm not making this argument to vendors. I'm not making this argument, although I do. I give schools a vendor due diligence checklist to ask these things. And suddenly we're finding kind of a roundabout way to put pressure on people. But I think there's also one last thing which I think is important to acknowledge. It's all very well for a woman in Dublin to say, this is so dangerous for energy, when Africa is looking at this as an incredible opportunity for unlocking. When they're looking at there are countries in Africa that are saying, we will invite nuclear energy because this is our accelerant. This is our moment to catch up. But I think it would take a certain amount of hubris and obnoxiousness for me to say, you can't do that because I've decided in Dublin that I don't have enough energy to meet my needs. So there's a humility that we require there too. So that's why it's a conversation as opposed to a lecture, although I am fully conscious I lectured you there for 40 minutes. But I think it is a much more nuanced conversation than polar debate would allow for.
Thank you. I mean, it's not so much that whether you answer my question or not, it's more a case of raising more of the questions and showing how complex it is to navigate through this particular space. It's kind of like we're in the water now anyway. There's, no getting out of that. But how we get to another side, maybe not. How we stay afloat whilst in the water is the big old challenge. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. And I think Geraldine is kind of echoing that too. The fact that we are talking about it is so much more beneficial because a year ago I wasn't living it and therefore I wasn't shouting from the rooftops. But now, there was a group, I was training a group of trainers last week and they couldn't connect to the internet and they were constantly moaning about it. And I was like, well, that's just Dublin. I'm sorry, that's how we are now. We have to kind of work around it. We send our slides in advance. We make our apologies at the beginning. They're like, I don't know how you can live like this. But the more people who have to live like that, I suppose, might change the nature of the debate. And then people might feel it more in their lived experience, like we said earlier. I think that having the conversation is one thing, living the conversation, I think, is probably a second thing.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing your tools and frameworks. I do love a framework, so I'm going to spend more time looking through those. They look so practical and helpful to support these discussions as well. Paul, shall I pass over to you to wrap up because we are nearly at the end of the hour?
Indeed. Thank you so much, first of all, Rita, for that incredibly powerful talk. I think that was kind of a sentiment held by all that was in the room just now. We will look to make the recording of this session and any of the links and things shared afterwards via our LinkedIn. So in the chat, I've put a link to that. Do feel free to connect with us there to receive those updates. Many thanks to all of you who came along to the session and kind of listened and engaged. And I know we'll take a lot from this. And if you haven't already, do please feel free to visit our Padlet and indicate if there's any kind of future events or topics that you might find useful or interesting for our next live event, which will hopefully be as incredible as this one. So yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you both. That was a real joy to be able to share all that doom and gloom with everybody.
Oh, no, thank you.
Thank
No,
you.
that was great. Yeah,
That
really,
was
really powerful.
yeah, and really valuable. And I think the detail in there is there's a lot of information, but it is really good to see, because I think it can cause, that you did mention that guilt feeling about what to do, what action to take, but having that data and examples and equivalents as well that you mentioned that you've done the work in, I think is really helpful to see practical steps that can be taken, so it doesn't become some overwhelming thing, that you have no power to influence. So